for Angela Philp today. Angela had another engagement, so she sends her apologies, but she did want her paper to be read, so I agreed to do that for her. Unfortunately, I will be reading it, so I'm sorry if it's not very animated because of that. I don't think I can add lib to someone else's paper. I've never done that before. And I don't think I can cut bits out either, so I hope it doesn't go too long. So Angela's the head of art history and theory at the University of Newcastle. I'm one of her colleagues in that department, and her research in today that's being presented then is into, I guess, the sort of the artistic events that were arranged in conjunction with the closure of BHP, and what they actually did in terms of, I guess, facilitating a kind of easy exit. So I'll just start reading now, and I'm sorry I probably won't be much good for questions either, but if you do have a question, give it a try, and I'll do my best, because I have already read the paper. All right, so the slide that we're starting with here is just from the mass walkout on the last day of BHP, which happened then at 11 o'clock, and was a kind of refusal of a sort of, I guess, an organised exit. So the workers banded together and left en masse at 11 o'clock, from what I understand. Okay, so I'll start with paper. Trade unions have always used the mechanism of collective bargaining as the prime means for achieving and representing the interests of employees. There are nevertheless times when this just isn't enough. Art has enormous social value and can be a catalyst in reclaiming social and political agency and autonomy out of circumstances when an employer seems to hold all the cards, as for instance when BHP announced it was going to close the Newcastle Steelworks. Art doesn't have to be loud and overt. It can be radical by subterfuge. It has the capacity to critically reimagine experience and possibilities. As Theodoro Adorno drew our attention to, the autonomous work of art is inherently dialectical. And it is this dialectic which draws our attention to the issues which are often hidden. For the Newcastle Steelworkers, some of the arts programs revealed a truer account of the relationship between labour and capital, and what the company sought to disguise about the closure.
Sorry, could you speak just a little bit louder?
I'll do my best. In this paper, I will explore the social value that the arts programs linked to the steelworks closure offered to workers. I'll briefly give an overview of the Ribbons of Steel program managed by BHP itself, and alternatively look at the Molten Arts project, which was run by the Workers' Cultural Action Committee, from here on called the WCAC, of Newcastle Trades Hall. Can you hear okay now?
Yeah.
Okay. The closure of the BHP Steelworks in Newcastle in 1999 had all the potential to be a convulsive and bitter experience for the workers involved. Yet it transpired as an orderly closure, a paradigm for best practice in corporate processes, whereby economic efficiencies are obtained by reducing workforces or completely closing parts or the whole of an enterprise. In Newcastle, the visual and performing arts were mobilised to ease the transition for the workers and to commemorate their struggles, experience and memories. Where was the radical element in this orderly closure? Arts programs have been part of trade union activities for decades. For instance, in the banners created to carry in marches and demonstrations. And Angela's just put two images of these types of banners, which are very artistic actually in design, as a way of sort of showing how important banners have been, often handmade as well. Well, always handmade actually at this point. So yes, and it's an art form that was also revived in the 1980s, and in the Art and Working Life program of the Australia Council established in 1982. Art in Working Life was an Australian council program that aimed to involve artists and trade union members, fostering the creative force within our culture and simultaneously seeking to revitalise the cultural traditions of the labour movement. It focused on social and political interaction between artists, unions and workers. So in 1999, there was nothing especially unusual in using the arts as a tool to focus attention and discussion on workplace issues. However, what emerged in Newcastle had to be an essentially subversive process, which in one of two allied, though philosophically diverse programs, Stories of Fears, Travails, and the strength of collaborative work environments were enabled to surface in a climate of company damage control. The original radical thinking of the Art in Working lifestyle programs, born in an era of stronger trade union militancy, was by the 1990s dissipated. The accord between the ACTU and the ALP, first created in the lead up to the 1983 federal election, was, according to writers Jeff Dow and George Lafferty, a principled effort to move from a labourist industrial relations model to a theoretically informed political unionism. Yet in the wake of the accord, politics and unionism had shifted, and the Australia Council's Art and Working Life program had been moved into general arts funding under the Community Cultural Development Fund. No longer was there a program of prominent projects that involved the arts and artists in direct political action with trade unions. So, in the closure of the steelworks, this is more a story of how radical intent can be found in means other than traditional union tactics, to tell truths of working life, and also how corporations can work to stymie political actions in sometimes subtle ways, using apparently similar tactics. In Newcastle, two distinct arts programs formed an alliance under the rubric of BHP's Ribbon of Steel program. It was a useful, if sometimes uneasy, arrangement. While the Workers' Cultural Action Committee of Newcastle Trades Hall worked on the Molten Arts projects that acknowledged the spectrum and complexity of workers' lives at PHP, the company itself, at the behest of one of its PR officers, created a program called Ribbons of Steel that has been described as a celebration. Certainly it was a highly effective public relations exercise that assuaged much of the anger that emerged when the closure was first declared. The steelworks closure was announced on the 29th of April 1997, 2.5 years in advance. This was not some economic bust with the workers sacked overnight, but a long-term restructuring of the industry. As BHP employee Rada Bradovic commented, "I know how companies they go, because you know BHP Newcastle, every profit here goes outside and never returns to modernise us, to give us some money, to a little bit proving condition of job quality." There was in fact so long to get used to the idea that it provided many opportunity for arts programs to get workers involved and to make sure their voices were heard. So we're going to go on to the Ribbons of Steel project now. And one of the things that Angela points out about this, I guess, is how the artwork itself indulges in a sense of nostalgia instead of being, I guess, overtly political in any way, although you would think that this bitterness with the closure might enact some of this kind of force. In October 1997, Bob Cook, who worked in BHP's External Affairs at the Newcastle plant, delivered a proposal to the head of External Affairs, Greg Cameron, to celebrate the end of the steelworks. From the beginning, this was intended as a public relations effort and meant to focus attention on the positive aspects of the change taking place. It was proposed that over the ensuing 2 years, there should be a managed program of artists, sculptors, photographers and writers who will be allowed to enter the plant to record, and this is a quote from his proposal, who will be allowed to enter the plant to record the essence of the industry and the emotion of the time, culminating in an open weekend for past and present employees, and for the project to provide a focus to a major event in 1999, producing a variety of memorabilia that employees will appreciate as they leave the plant. The report acknowledged that the closure would be an emotional time for many of the local population and has the potential to produce some bitterness and reaction against the company. Overall, Cook proposed 54 projects or components, including artists in residence, exhibitions and performances to mark the 84th anniversary of the steelworks in June 1999, and a series of end products, such as exhibitions, in particular showing work by the amateur group the Society of Artists, a range of books and CD-ROMs, photographs, memorabilia, such as coasters and calendars with specially designed artwork on them, a play, music and songs, plant tours for the local community, and a video of the history of the steelworks. He also appointed an arts manager, Rebecca Kunek, who come from interstate to oversee the many projects. The artists involved were given full access to the steelworks site and many of its resources and labour power. The final outcome, as planned, was a week from the 27th of August to the 4th of September 1999, when the tool room, a vast space on the site, and you can see that here in this image, was converted to an exhibition space. Here the Society of Artists members displayed painting and prints, and here you can see some of the paintings, but as said, they're quite a soft, romantic view of the steelworks, really, as are some of the others. There were ceramic tiles made by employees and printed with elements of the steelworks and combined to create a sculpture. There was art made by local school students. BHP bricklayers created a special area of paving near the entrance, and various work teams displayed elements from their work environments and many objects that functioned as memory works, recalling the history of the place. While it had an air of celebration and pride, these mostly offered nostalgia, certainly less critical reflection on the experience of the closure. These are photographs that were part of the exhibition. Ribbons of Steel was also incorporated work by professional artists, including George Gittos, and the slide on the left has an image of a painting from Gittos, who is now best known as being a war artist in Iraq, and generally makes very overtly political work. Some of them are quite disturbing to look at, really. So it's interesting to look at this work and see that what he's done actually is taken a disused chair and presented it then as an image of emptiness or absence. So it's sort of standing in for the closure and the lack of people.
It's very subdued.
Yeah, it's very subdued.
Very sensible.
So there was also then a choir that was singing in the steelworks, and a book then that was produced for Ribbons of Steel. Interestingly, the book goes up to 1999 and doesn't include anything to do with the bitterness or the politics surrounding the closure as well. Angela's written in here. So I'm going to go on now to the Molten Arts project. Most significant were the projects that focused on employees and their own voices and experiences. In its own response to the closure, the WCAC established a three-stage program fairly early on called the Molten Arts Project. Over time, Bob Cook approached the WCAC and offered them BHP support and the capacity to be a satellite event of Ribbons of Steel. It was a collaborative program with the Steelworks employees and aimed to express the fears and hopes of the community of the working people. While I don't have time to go into details on all the projects here, it included this major sculpture then by artist Julie Squires, who worked together with many of the workers at the steelworks, called The Muster Point. A book was produced with interviews, writing and performances called Tailing Out. BHP workers talk about live steelmaking and the Newcastle closure. So these are then recording direct experiences, I guess, of the workers. A lot of these stories were then transformed into a performance, also named them Tailing Out the Performance, which was very popular and was also turned into a series of 20-minute sort of lunchtime performances that were put on for the workers at the steelworks. It was very popular. And there was also a project called In Our Time, where 120 cameras, disposable cameras, were distributed amongst the staff, and they were allowed to then take photos of the steelworks. So basically from their own perspectives. So as James Campbell, the coordinator, noted, it would have been easy to walk around the steelworks and take photos like a tourist, but it would have been an outsider's interpretation of the site. What is more important to me is how the employees view the steelworks and the people who work there, to capture the effects of the place and people on their working lives. It was part of the self-imaging concept. So I think we've got a couple of other images there from that part of the project. And I think they do, in some ways, give us a little bit more insight into how it actually was then to work at BHP. So in our time was shown in the tool room, the exhibition venue of Ribbons of Steel, and later at the Lovett Gallery in the Newcastle Region Library, but then toured to Wollongong and Ipswich under the title Last Days at Big Harry's, which was one of the nicknames for the steelworks and also is the title of Angela's paper. In particular, early on, P.B. Cranny began doing interviews with workers and running writing workshops to assist them to tell their own stories. This was a deliberate strategy to develop two of the major projects. Okay, and the tailing out performance was done in conjunction with the company Theatre Physical. It particularly focused on the last section of the book, The Works, Life, Love and Death. It was where workers recalled some of the site deaths, work hazards and stresses of the job. Some of it is pretty harrowing material. The words of the workers were used verbatim to create a physical theatre performance, an interdisciplinary style using movement, dance, music, visual art and theatre. The performance used an 8-metre-high aerial rig from which performers enacted gymnastic feats paralleling the dangerous work of the plant. You can see some of that in these images. Two skeletal steel structures designed to represent the steelworks, a projection screen background, and had an original score by Blair Greenwood, primarily using sounds recorded at the steelworks. As well as providing the words, two BHP employees also appeared in the performance, originally intended to be performed at the steelworks itself as part of the Ribbons of Steel Construction Repository Performance venue. It was moved to the Newcastle Workers Club. This was for both logistical reasons, two performances being rehearsed in the same location was problematic, and because the workers themselves wanted a night away from the steelworks instead of returning to the site in the evening. More significantly, and I quote here from WCAC Arts Officer Steve Wilson, problems arose regarding the integrity and independence of the committee's work. Ribbons of Steel management had expressed its intentions to vet all work done by WCAC. Given that the committee had undertaken the majority of its works for the Molten Art project with little or no interference, nor a contractual wish to vet the committee's work from BHP management, this requirement from Ribbons of Steel had the potential to alter the relationship between the WCAC, BHP and the employees. Wilson continued, and here Angela quotes at some length. The last point also raised a number of implications regarding the funding of the performance. Initially, BHP had agreed to financially assist the project, but would not specify the amount of support. With the committee moving the performance off-site, Ribbons of Steel management questioned what support Ribbons of Steel and BHP should provide to the performance. This was in spite of the wish of Ribbons of Steel management to have satellite events and performances surrounding the Ribbons of Steel event, and in spite of the good work that the committee had done in introducing the Steelworks employees to the values and benefits of art activities through the Molten Arts project. For example, a small presentation of excerpts from Tailing Out BHP Workers Talk About Life that toured the steelworks, playing lunchrooms and in workshops, was continually asked to be performed again and identified as part of Ribbons of Steel. One employee was asked by a local radio journalist after viewing the presentation, "What do you think of Ribbons of Steel?" "Not much till I saw this," was the reply. After lobbying of both BHP and Ribbons of Steel management, it was agreed that the company would support the performance by an upfront financial contribution and through purchasing a number of tickets for distribution to employees. This was not the end of the matter. Tailing Out the performance did not feature in any promotions or publicity for Ribbons of Steel. Though considered a satellite event, it was totally disregarded. It seemed that by retaining its integrity and independence, the committee was being reprimanded for its stand. One of the aims of the WCAC was to establish a program with a community rather than a series of one-off disconnected projects, and to make a firm statement about the value of cultural development. Tailing out the performance was considered an affirmation of this policy and part of the ongoing relationships with unions and union members. Molten Arts allowed this side of the closure to be heard, that it was a particular community with a complex set of relationships and aspirations. It was quite a form of radicalism in the post-accord era. The need to control the satellite events, as well as vetting the content of the ribbons of steel on-site activities, was not actually about funding. In fact, Bob Cook reports that his original $375,000 budget from BHP blew out early on, and some multiples of this were actually spent. Management reportedly never questioned the amounts of money, considering it well spent because of the good feelings the projects generated. Retraining schemes, decent payouts, except to those workers who'd long since been laid off and re-employed as contractors, and a sense of nostalgia created through ribbons of steel meant that workers started to see themselves as part of a passing historical epoch. Yet, as Tailing Out recorded, this didn't represent the views of all the employees. The orderly closure wasn't quite as clean as imagined. So there we have the reports of the mass walkout on the last day, and also the report that the PM stays home so that John Howard didn't actually then front up to speak to the workers on the day, which was criticised.
Please do my story.
As Bob Hayden, who worked in the Steve Doring section of the BHP Transport, said, "It's not just a job, it's a way of life to people. We have a social structure inside the union where we involve ourselves not just in work issues, but in social issues. You go and see any social issue and you'll see a contingent of waterside workers or seamen there. Last week I was down on a picket line in Newcastle. We have Telstra making $3 billion profit and they want to sack 2,500 people. Try to justify that. Yet then people asked if we could come down, you know, give a little bit of moral support, which they definitely need. 20 or 30 of us go down. It's not in work time. It's in time that we can find to go down there. That's what builds it up inside. That's why we're hard to defeat." I think BHP as a big company has let the people of Newcastle down. They've raped and pillaged, for want of better words, this city of Newcastle at times. When the whole world's going through hard times, they turn their back on Newcastle. You know, no, I won't miss BHP. And this, as our final image, is the thank you advertisement that was placed in the Newcastle Herald on the day of the closure, which looks very sort of patronising, I guess, in retrospect. And you'll see there the imagery in terms of art content as well is a sort of historical image of past times, and then a worker sort of very romantically depicted as something that's over at retirement age as well. And that's it. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Faye. Now, Faye is not obviously taking questions as the reader of the paper, but I wondered if there were any comments, any thoughts to feed back to Angela about that. I thought there was a nice synergy there with part of it.
People actually cried in that because of the clash of the older generation, the older man, and the younger generation, highly trained and so forth, and the mother in between. It was very moving.
I'll tell Angela about that.
Yes, the other thing, I was wondering, I was very interested to hear about Angela. She chose the word Big Harry's Place. And I've always been amazed how BHP morphed into becoming called Big Harry's Place. In 2003, I wrote a 12-part series for the Stockton History Journal, a historical row along Platts Channel, because that's the south arm of the Hunter going up into the Platts Channel, which has been industrialised. And if I may, I can just read you a small portion. Capital and labour, boss and union clashed and bargained over wages and conditions. Some men died, many were injured in the harsh early days before science and technology eased their lot. Some men sweating in the open hearth pit rolling mills or hand-quenching coke called themselves wage slaves. my father was one of them, and the old bloke in the open hearth down the river from me on Mosquito Island did. Those such names don't get into history books. These working man terms reveal perceptions which changed gradually over the years, all spoken with heavy irony. BHP stood for big-hearted people, broken hearts for profit, bloody hard people. Now I grew up with that, it begins in my ears, until it mellowed into Big Harry's people. I first heard that term in 1992, and I just wonder if anyone here in Newcastle or in this room can know where it came from. The blare of shift work whistles they blew every 8 hours. The men called that his master's voice, recalling the listening dog on the old-time style gramophone. I'm not completely one-eyed. I know all of a kind of love-hate or fascinated hate relationship arose from the dark drama of heat and iron and steel, and humans wearied by the toil they paid in sweat and toil. Out of it a vast skilled force of professions, trades and callings was created. We have to, that is a fact of history. But then I go on about the river. I'll shut up there because I really am very hot about the river. But has anyone got any comments on how it became Big Harry's people?
Yeah, how did it become Big Harry?
Well, I think it was just a nickname, you know, how any nickname, like how does someone
Somebody
get a
must have made
nickname?
it up.
Right.
But it softens the image, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it's very recent.
Yeah.
Wasn't around when I was a very
It's a bit like, when did Newcastle become Newey? About 3 years ago, I thought, but 57 years now everyone calls it Newey. I've never heard of it until 3 years ago.
It was much,
Are you old fogey?
I can remember the steel worker, Ernie Widdowson. I have a photograph of him in his flannel shirt, the men wear them. He worked in the open hearth. He helped build the steelworks across the river. And he came home during the Second World War when they were, and we were, make no mistake, very glad to have the steelworks during the war because it became creating our weapons. We thought we were going to be invaded. It was very real. The river people's launches were taken from them. And they were taken to Carrington, and I found out 60 years later they were going to burn them if the Japanese had invaded it. We got our little launch, the Lady May back, but Ernie came home to Nistone. He was triumphant. He rode up the creek, yelling out on his word. My word, the judge came up from Sydney to arbitrate on the demolishers who went into the open hearth to take out the silica bricks and replace them. They had to stay in 30 minutes. And they sweated a lot. He'd come home 140 degrees a day, eating salt tablets all day, drinking water. The judge decreed that they only had to stay in 20 minutes. And he came out and he's triumphant because they got 10 minutes less.
Yeah.
That'll give you some idea of what the word. They were really tough men. And why did they do it? They had to feed their families. And that was why I feel so bitterly resentful when I hear people looking down on Newcastle, because they don't know what it's like to be a coal miner or a steel worker or a waterside worker who lumped with their hooks heavy loads of wheat and everything you can think of. So I want an answer to why Big Harry's people.
I'll do my best to find out.
Thank you.